Success Insight shares the stories of the people with passion and drive who make things happen in the world. Here's your host, Howard Fox.
Hello, everybody. This is Howard Fox, and welcome to another episode of the Success Insight podcast. Our guest today is Matt DiBiase. Now, Matt describes himself as a lifelong sports historian, and he does have the credentials to back this up. He is the author of Bench Bosses, the NHL's Coaching Elite, which was published in 2015. This was the first hockey book to rate and rank the greatest NHL coaches of all time. He then went on to author The Art of the Dealers, the NHL's Greatest General Managers, published in 2017. The Art of the Dealers is the first NHL book of its kind to rate the greatest general managers in the NHL. Matt's most recent book, which was just published in September, congratulations, Matt, is The Lords of the Gridiron, College Football's Greatest Coaches. Lords of the Gridiron has been described as absolutely outstanding and as a groundbreaking book that boldly goes where no other college football book has ever gone before, revealing and ranking the 50 greatest college football coaches of all times using an analytical rating system. Matt is also an accomplished podcaster. He is the host of the Frathouse Sports, which can be found on Blog Talk Radio, as well as the Package Tourist, which can be found on YouTube. Matt, it is such a pleasure to welcome you to the Success Insight podcast.
Thank you, Howard. Thank you so much. It's a great honor to be on.
Matt, all I can say is these books are bringing me back to my youth. Now, I am in my 50s, and I remember just growing up with sports cards, and whether it was baseball, whether it was hockey, football, occasionally even basketball, just having the lineup of the teams laid out in front of me. As you know, I grew up in Detroit Tigers. That's my team. It's actually against the law to root for any other team, I might add. It's on our birth certificates. But I remember all those statistics, and you have done something amazing, which is to delve into the statistics of what makes these great coaches. And I would love if you could share a little bit about your background and how you got into this work as a lifelong sports historian.
I was born and raised most of my life in southern New Jersey, in and around the Burlington County, Camden County area till like 2012, and then I moved to Northeast Philadelphia. But basically, I've lived in the Delaware Valley area, the greater Philadelphia area, all my life. I grew up in a sports household. Since we're Philadelphia, we were rooting for the Philadelphia Phillies, the Philadelphia Eagles, the 76ers, the Flyers, and so forth. Basically, but there was a lot of suffering involved because my salad days, Philadelphia teams never really did very good and all of that. So a lot of pain and suffering watching sports on TV. But I grew up in a very bookish and literate household. I was always encouraged to read books, and my father always loved sports. So we always had a lot of good sports books there, histories, military histories, biographies, and stuff like that. So I grew up reading, and I developed a love for reading sports history. In fact, when I was 10 years old, I could recite all the World Series winners from 1903 up to 73 without missing a beat.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, I couldn't play sports worth a doggone, but I could talk sports history. Even when I was a little kid, I could talk sports history. Like who was the first pitcher to win 3 games in a World Series? Hank Gowdy batted .545 in the 1914 World Series and all of that. Things of that nature. I could recite highlights. Give a year, I could recite highlights and results. Just like that. So I always had the history in my head. I knew the Super Bowl winners, the NFL championship winners, the great players, and all that. I could memorize it. Back then, the old IBM was pretty good. So I always had a love for sports history. You know, who did this? Who won the Rose Bowl in 1969? Stuff like that. Sports trivia. I was always very good with that.
So your friends probably would have liked to take you to the sports trivia nights at the local bar in the corner, I would imagine.
I didn't drink in those days, so no sports trivia things for me. Unfortunately, I didn't drink back then. When it came to writing, I started writing when I was like 17 years old. First, it was like poetry and song lyrics. And I continued like when I was in college. But then when I started grad school in 1987, I became an op-ed columnist for my college newspaper. I went to the University, Rutgers University, Camden College of Arts and Sciences from 1982 to 1989 for both my undergrad and my graduate studies. And I got my BA in 86 and my master's in 1991. But when I was in grad school for a 2-year period, I was an op-ed columnist, basically doing a very poor man's David Broder, as it were, and all that. But it developed me because I was able to make the transition from like poetry and song lyrics to prose. And I realized, and I was getting feedback from people like, that was a pretty interesting column and all of that. So I realized, okay, I'm developing something here. I'm developing a little bit of a talent here. And there were times when I would submit like op-ed pieces to like local newspapers like the Camden Courier-Post and the Burlington County Times, even like the Philadelphia Inquirer, but the Inquirer never accepted any of my stuff. But I kind of drifted away from prose writing. Then in like the mid-2000s, I began an abortive book project. I was trying to write an oral history of the NHL's original six era from 1942 to 1967. For like 5 years, I traveled around North America, both U.S. and Canada, interviewing old hockey players, trying to get this together. But after 5 years, I had to shelve the thing because I realized I couldn't get it together, and I didn't think I could do it justice. So I put it on the shelf, kind of drifted for a while, and then like a year later, I began this idea of writing columns for an online magazine called Inside Hockey, where I was talking about the great hockey coaches of all time. And I slowly but surely developed this system. It was influenced by a book Bill James, the great baseball historian, wrote in the mid-'90s about the great baseball managers. And he created this system, which I since kind of took and evolved even further. You award a point for doing a certain thing. Like if you got a winning season, you get a point. Your winning percentage is above 600, you get an extra point, so on and so forth. There was like a single point every time you did 5 or 6 things.
Right.
But I took that and I used that method at first, and then I found some weaknesses in it, and I started working with it. And it took me like 2 years to really perfect it. And I started, instead of a single point for meeting a certain standard, what I did was a sliding scale. The more common the event was, the lower the point value. The less common the event was, it was a higher point value. Like the ultimate point value was winning the Stanley Cup. You would get 6 points for that. So it was like a sliding scale from 1 to 6. And this was my twist. I also used a negative scale. It was a plus-minus system.
Right.
Whereas Bill James wasn't using a plus-minus system. It was just strictly a plus system. I used a plus-minus system where if you had a losing season, you would only lose a point. If you failed to make the playoffs, you would lose 2 points. If you finished in last place, you would lose 4, so on down the line. So it balanced out. It was symmetrical, a symmetrical plus-minus system. And once I perfected that, by 2013, I had it all figured out. I knew who the 50 were. And then what it took was I just had to flesh out the chapters, sequence it, put it all in order. The manuscript for Bench Bosses, which was my first book, was done in 2013, but I had to take 2 years for official publication because I had a deal with Penguin Random House, and they wanted to put it out in time for Christmas. So I had to do a 1 year's delay, and I had to, of course, update it to reflect the results of 2 additional seasons.
Sure.
So finally, in the fall of 2015, Bench Bosses came out officially, and that launched me. That was my first official publication.
That was a huge book, too. I mean, that's a pretty big, heavy book. A lot of data.
Yeah, it was very encyclopedic because not only was I dealing in the top 50, I was also articulating chapters like who was the best coach, who were the top 3 coaches in the 1930s or the 50s or the 2010s and so forth. I even had a chapter on the 10 worst NHL coaches of all time. And also I created that concept of, which we can talk about later, the concept of a heartbreak coach. And I created that concept.
Let's talk a little bit about that now, because I remember that was a key term in these books. And I mean, we all have a definition of a heartbreak, but what is your definition and how was that introduced in the books? Okay.
When I was doing research for Bench Bosses, I came across this unique phenomenon. Coaches who were part of my top 50 who had a lot of playoff appearances, but they never, ever got a berth in the Stanley Cup Finals. I thought, this is interesting. And some of those coaches, men like Brian Murray, Bruce Boudreau, Jacques Martin, guys like that, they had a lot of playoff appearances, but they were incapable of taking their team to the Stanley Cup Finals. And all of a sudden, I had this little germ of an idea, and I came up with this concept called a heartbreak coach. The definition of a heartbreak coach is this: any coach, whether it be hockey or basketball or pro football or baseball, who has had a minimum of 5 postseason appearances without ever taking their team to the championship finals, whether it's a World Series or a Super Bowl or the Stanley Cup Finals or the NBA Finals. In other words, as long as you can't take your team to the championship finals, in other words, earn a ticket to the big dance, and you missed 5 times, that makes you a heartbreak coach. And I mean, some coaches got fired simply because they couldn't take their teams to the next level. I mean, that was like an explanation. And I decided to create a term for that. And some coaches, though, have gotten out of their heartbreak coaching thing, like Barry Trotz, who's now the head coach of the New York Islanders. For a time, he was a heartbreak coach, and for a time, he led all active NHL coaches in the heartbreak coaching stakes. And then finally, 2 years ago, he managed to get the Caps into the Stanley Cup Finals, and he won. So he not only ended his heartbreak coaching streak, he also won his first Stanley Cup title. I mean, that's the thing. You don't have to win the Stanley Cup to stop being a heartbreak coach. All you have to do is get a berth in the championship finals, and that ends your heartbreak coaching streak. And I applied that to hockey. You can apply that in NBA basketball. Actually, NBA basketball has more heartbreak coaches than NHL hockey does.
Really?
Seriously. Because I was going to do a book on pro basketball, and it was supposed to come out in 2016, but I had to put that on the shelf because my agent at the time couldn't get a publishing deal for me. So I shelved it and went on to my second book, which is The Art of the Dealers, the NHL's Greatest General Managers.
Now, and I should say, in the spirit of full disclosure, I couldn't name a statistic if it stared me right in the face. Okay. I just, I remember the years the Detroit Tigers won the World Series, and that's it. I mean, I don't even know how many times the Red Wings won the Stanley Cup. Okay.
Yeah.
But is the passion around the NHL's coaching elite, is it the same level of passion for the general managers? Are there folks out there like you who are really passionate about the folks that are able to build a great team like these general managers did?
I think my second book, The Art of the Dealers, the NHL's Greatest General Managers, appeals to hardcore sports hockey historians or sports historians like myself who are really into that. They're information junkies. Now, I couldn't get a conventional publishing deal for The Art of the Dealers. They took a pass on it. So what I did was I self-published that using CreateSpace, which has now been merged with Kindle Digital Publishing, which is an Amazon subsidiary. And that's what I did. I self-published it. And now it's not selling. It never sold like hotcakes, but then I knew that going into the game. But amazingly, Howard, I track the sales every day. Someone's buying it. I mean, you get a little here, a little like once or twice a month or something like that. Someone's making a purchase for the book.
Something that really, I would venture to guess. I mean, I probably would bet on this. When you think about the podcast out there, the talk radio shows. Okay. I mean, you got a couple talk radio shows and a podcast. I will bet there's probably more folks talking in these podcasts about sports and sports related topics than almost any other genre. I mean, maybe the self-help might surpass that. But if you look at the podcast, if you look at all these radio shows, you've got, what's the sports channel? Geez, I should know what that is.
ESPN, you got ESPN, Fox Sports.
Yeah, you got ESPN 1 all the way to dodgeball, ESPN Ocho, but there's tons of people out there talking about sports. You've got all these sports leagues, these electronic leagues, which is becoming big business, talking about data. And so I can see where your books are really getting sales, because there are people who are just eating this up because they're all trying to get the right formula to build their own virtual sports team.
Yeah. And what I did with the second book was I wanted to expand the realm of sports history, because it is really, like you described in your intro, it is the first time anyone ever attempted to rate and analyze general managers of one of the four major North American sports: football, baseball, basketball, and hockey. I mean, imagine if someone wrote a book about who were the greatest general managers in baseball history. Imagine comparing Branch Rickey with the late George Weiss, who was the GM of the Yankees during their dynasty years, or Buzzy DiBiase as compared to Paul Owens of the Phillies. I mean, that would be fascinating in its own right if you could rate and evaluate baseball general managers. And I talked to these men. I mean, for that second book, I interviewed men like Lou Lamoriello, who's the present GM of the New York Islanders, Doug Wilson of the San Jose Sharks, David Poile, the general manager of the Nashville Predators. These are men who had managed Stanley Cup finalist Jim Rutherford. I interviewed him on Thanksgiving Day, 2016. He was on the road with a team in Minnesota, had nothing to do in the morning. It was a killer interview. Fantastic. He was a great guy. He was honored, tickled pink. And they talk about, how do you build a winner? How do you build a playoff contender? How do you build a Stanley Cup champion? I mean, imagine if you wanted to get into sports management. Here it is. Here's a how-to. It's like with my third book, Lords of the Gridiron, College Football's Great Coaches. These coaches are telling me how it is. How do you make your team a champion, a national champion? How do you make it? How do you build a winner? This is how do you lead young men in the games?
I have to say, with the NHL's Coaching Elite and the NHL's Greatest General Managers, those books, and even I would say the NBA, the NFL, they're all regional, so to speak. You've got a big city. You're in the Philadelphia network.
Yep.
I grew up in Detroit. I live in the Chicago network. I've never rooted for a Chicago team, I might add. Again, Detroit is on my birth certificate. It's against the law. But those are regional. We all move around the country, different countries per se. But for the Lords of the Gridiron, the passion around the university and the football team, I mean, that transcends geographic location. And I think perhaps people take that argument of who is the greatest NFL coach or who is the greatest college football coach, they take that, I would think, Matt, to a whole other level.
Yep.
Is that a true statement?
Oh yeah. I mean, exactly 2 days from now will be the 150th anniversary of the very first college football game played on November 6th, 1869, between Rutgers and Princeton. And on that day, 150 years ago, started something that has now developed into a mega million, if not billion-dollar industry that saturates the entire continental United States. It's in terms of passion. College football has defined our folklore, our cultural folklore, even influenced our presidential politics. Look at Ronald Reagan. He played George Gipp in a movie and used that imagery to promote his own presidency, as it were. People think he was the real Gipper, or no, he just played the Gipper in a movie. There are books, there are documentaries. Bear Bryant is a part of American cultural folklore. Knute Rockne is a part of American cultural folklore. You've got ESPN doing a multi-part series on the history of college football. I mean, they've been showing episodes. I mean, their latest episode is about Notre Dame University. And 5 Notre Dame coaches are featured in this book here: Rockne, Frank Leahy, Dan Devine, Lou Holt, and Ara Persijan. This book, Lords of the Gridiron, covers every corner of the United States, from the University of Washington to USC to Penn State University to Alabama to Oklahoma.
And these were not just Division 1A? Is that would be the top notch, right?
Yeah, strictly confined to those Division 1A coaches who have coached a minimum of 10 seasons at the Division 1A level. There was only 2 exceptions to that 10-year rule. That's Pete Carroll at USC, who did 9 years, and the late Walter Camp, who coached at Yale for only 7 seasons. But I explain that in the book there. There's certain specific reasons for those 2 exceptions.
Sure.
But the rule is a minimum of 10 seasons of coaching. So in my book, there's a pool of 416 coaches who were eligible. I ran those 416 through my system, which again is a plus-minus system where, based on winning percentage, like if your winning percentage is between 501 to 549, you get a single point. If you make a minor bowl game appearance, you get 9 points. If you win a major bowl game, you get 12 points. If you win the national championship, you get 15. So it's from 1 to 15. And then conversely, if you have like a losing season where your winning percentage is only between 450 to 499, you lose a point. If it's between 200 to 249, you lose 6 points. If you lose a minor bowl game, you lose 10 points. And you lose a major bowl game, you lose 12 points. That's why Bo Schembechler rates very low in my book, because he lost all of those Rose Bowl games and Orange Bowl games, and that really took points off his lifetime record there. It was a killer.
I got to tell you, I always used to say when I still lived in Detroit at the time, because when I grew up as a teenager, I had friends that either went to Michigan or Michigan State. I went to Wayne State. Nobody remembers us except for we had a nationally ranked fencing team. But I always remember Bo could never win the big one. It was like he put all his cards and energies on the table to win against his former mentor, Woody Hayes at Ohio State.
Sure.
And it's almost as though there's a limiting belief when he tells his people, his players, oh, don't worry about the Rose Bowl. It's great that we're going, or wherever bowl game we're going. Ohio State, that's what counts. And so it seems like they expended all their energy to go into that game. Hopefully they won, but they just never could win the big one. And I was amazed he was even still on the list, but he was there.
Yeah, I mean, he's in the 40s, like the I think 44th or 45th or something like that. I mean, that shocked me because that came from his memoirs too. That quote where, we're just focused, we're going to win the big one against Ohio State. We're just going to win on the Big Ten Conference Championship. We're not going to worry about the bowl games or the national championship. And I talk about this in the book. I said, imagine if Bear Bryant gave a similar type speech to his players at Alabama that's saying, we're not worried about the national championship. All we're focusing on is winning the Iron Bowl against Auburn and maybe win the SEC championship too. And I say in the book, if Bear Bryant had ever given that type of speech, he would have been fired very quickly at Alabama. Or if Barry Switzer had given a similar type speech at Oklahoma, no, he would not have lasted very long there. And I mean, in a sense, talking about Bo Schembechler, in a sense, what he did was he got his players to basically, it was a study of the science of the second best. In other words, not to be the best, just, in other words, lowering of expectations. And I cannot imagine someone like Nick Saban or Urban Meyer, for that matter, ever articulating what Schembechler told his players like that. Because I interviewed Urban Meyer about 3 or 4 weeks after he had coached the 2019 Rose Bowl game. He had officially retired. And in my book, I named him the greatest of all time in one of my categories, which is the average season rating, which measures a coach's ability to get consistent high performance out of his teams. And Urban Meyer was the greatest of all time in that single category. No other coach did better than he did in getting a consistent maximum effort out of his players. Better than Paterno, better than Bear Bryant, even better than Saban, for that matter.
So I'm curious, of all these coaches, and I mean, the list is phenomenal. And as you go through it, folks, when you go out to get this book, The Lords of the Gridiron, College Football's Greatest Coaches, you go through this list, and these are names that they're a part of our national conversation.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter where you are, where you live. I am curious, two items. Who's the heartbreak coach here?
Well, you can't, now going back to the heartbreak coaching thing, you can't really apply it to college football coaching at the present time, because remember, we only recently we had a college football playoff. I mean, before you had BCS, which was just first it was Bowl Alliance, then Bowl Coalition, and BCS, where you just basically take the top two and they play each other for the national championship. But starting in 2014, when you finally had a college football playoff where they had, the top four teams, right now there are only 4 men who have been in the college football playoff but have never, ever played in the national championship game. And that's the definition of a heartbreak coach. You can get a playoff appearance, but you haven't reached the national championship game. And right now, no one has had 5 playoff appearances without ever appearing in a national championship game. I mean, right now, there are only 4 men who technically are heartbreak coaches, though they don't have 5 playoff appearances. You've got Chris Peterson, who's the present head coach at the University of Washington, Mark D'Antonio, who's head coach at Michigan State, Jimbo Fisher, who's right now, I think he's head coach, I think with the Texas A&M, and right now Lincoln Riley, who's the head coach at Oklahoma. He has had 2 playoff appearances, but he hasn't reached the national championship game yet. All the other coaches who have taken part in the college football playoff, they have earned berths in the national championship game. So you can't really apply the Heartbreak coaching label to those men because, like I said before, the definition is you can't, to be a Heartbreak coach, you can never ever earn a ticket to the championship game, one of those two tickets. If you don't earn that ticket, then that makes you a Heartbreak coach. And if you do it 5 times, that makes you a Heartbreak coach. Right now, no one in college football has reached that level of 5 playoff appearances without having made it to the national championship game. So we're not at that level yet. Like I said, you can apply it to NHL hockey. You can apply it to NBA basketball, pro football, Major League Baseball. There are 3 Major League managers who have had a minimum of 5 playoff postseason appearances without ever having won a pennant. And that's Buck Showalter, Bob Melvin of the Oakland A's, and Ron Gardenhire, who managed the Minnesota Twins. They had 5 or 6 playoff appearances without ever winning a pennant. You could apply, and you could also apply it to NCAA basketball because there are coaches who have had a minimum. I changed the system. You have to have 10 tournament appearances without ever reaching the Final Four. And that's a very small list. And there's some notable names who are a part of that list. And when I finally write my college basketball book, it'll probably be like 10 years from now, the whole world will learn who those Heartbreak coaches are. But you'll have to wait 10 years for that, okay?
We'll be anticipating. I'm sure this book will come out before George R.R. Martin finishes Winds of Winter. I have a question, though, regarding your book, though.
Yes.
You had some really phenomenal interviews.
Yes.
I mean, just the fact that all of these books, people who essentially shared their love, their passion, their pain, their joy, and all sides of the equation when it comes to managing and leading a sports team.
Yeah. Is
there a story in particular that kind of jumps out at you that if you're open to this, you could kind of share and gift to our listening audience?
Yes. One of the players I interviewed was Dr. Ted Coy, who played on the 1969 Texas Longhorns team that won the national championship for Darrell Royal. In fact, we're coming up in a few weeks. On December 6th will be the 50th anniversary of the famous Game of the Century featuring the Texas Longhorns versus the Arkansas Razorbacks. That was played at Fayetteville, Arkansas, at the University of Arkansas in Fayetteville. And it was a famous event because President Richard Nixon, along with some other political dignitaries, were in the stands in that day watching the game. Reverend Billy Graham gave the invocation. It was shown on nationwide TV. It was a landmark event in the history of college football. It was supposed to mark the centennial of college football. And after the game, when Texas won, Richard Nixon gave a trophy to Darrell Royal to proclaiming him the national champion and all of that. Even though the AP polls weren't finished yet, they would wait till after the bowl games were played before officially declaring Texas national champions. But I talked to Ted Coy, who was there in 1968 when Darrell Royal and his offensive coordinator, Emory Bellard, introduced the wishbone formation for the very first time. And we talked about that experience. What was he like as a coach and as a leader? What was it like playing that game? And he told me this incredible story about how much in awe and what an awe-inspiring presence Darrell Royal was as a coach and a leader. And I'm going to read to you the ending of my chapter on Darrell Royal. And it goes something like this. Quote, "Still, long before he died, Darrell Royal had already become an august presence, folklore made flesh like Davy Crockett, Jim Bowie, and Sam Houston. Victory begets awe and wonder while beckoning to those who want to feast in the fruits of victory. Darrell was someone who knew how to win and knew how to teach others to win. Darrell K. Royal didn't need myth and legend to burnish his reputation because what he actually did as a coach at Texas went beyond myth and legend. And for those who doubt this, let the words of Dr. Ted Coy, who, like his brother Ernie, came, endured, played, and triumphed under Royal's guidance, stand as gospel about how Darrell Royal stood in the eyes of his players and in the eyes of Texas Longhorn fans. This is the voice of Dr. Ted Coy. Quote, "Every Sunday afternoon at 4 p.m., the entire team would gather in the annex across the gym, which was across the street from our dorm. We were in a huge classroom, and the coaches' offices were upstairs, so the coaches would come down the flight of stairs. Now, what's interesting is that Coach Royal never told us, I want you all here by 4:00. But as a rule, no one ever came in after 3:50 because everybody was already there. Now, why did we do this? Because Coach Royal said, be here at 4 p.m. and we were going to be ready to start. The classroom had these old-fashioned chairs with one-arm tables on them. And we would start drifting in at 3:30 or 3:45 and take our seats, and we would be facing the front of the room. And so when it was 3:55, the assistant coaches would come down, and they would hang out in the back of the room. And the only way you could get into this room was from the back. Now, I always sat in the front left of the room. And typically when you have a bunch of guys, you have the rumble of conversation and the noise level gets higher and higher. And then suddenly Coach Royal would walk in, and it was Sunday afternoon, and he would be casually dressed, shoes, slacks, polo type shirt. He would walk into the room and he would walk up the center aisle. And I watched this every week as guys were facing forward and he's coming from behind. If the guys saw him in their peripheral vision, they would stop talking in mid-sentence. And so this hush preceded him as he walked towards the front of the room, and he would turn around. And when he turned around, no one said anything. No one breathed heavy. No one sneezed. It was eerie silence. And he never, ever said, guys, let me have your attention. That was Coach Royal. That was the aura he carried, the character that he carried. And that happened every week. That is the story that best depicts Coach Royal. And why was that? I can't explain it. Actually, Dr. Ted Coy just did. Unquote.
That is fantastic. I mean, it's a legend, mythical in a way.
Yeah. And it was rough. I mean, he talked, Dr. Ted Coy and his brother Ernie talked about those training camps in that hot Texas sun. And he whipped him. He whipped him. I don't know if he could do what he did today. And all of that. But when he drove him hard, and he demanded absolute total dedication. If you fell 1 inch short of that dedication, you were gone. Goodbye. Out. Leave. And those who survived stayed. But if you had the guts and the moxie and the courage and the will to survive, he could make you national champions. And in 1963, 1969, and in 1970, in the coaches poll, the University of Texas were college football national champions.
That is phenomenal. And on this note, it's just, again, a wonderful testament, not only to the stories and to the legends that we have grown up with. And it doesn't matter where we've lived. Michigan and Bo Schembechler, Urban Meyer, Nick Saban, Darrell Royal. They're all names that, if we cared about college football on a Saturday, those names are very familiar to us. I am curious about a couple items, Matt. If you were to go back and have lunch, dinner, whatever this might be, a breakfast, of all the coaches that you have studied, researched, gathered the data, perhaps you've even chatted with them, who would you go back and want to have a nice casual conversation with?
I think because of his influence, I think it's got to be Rockne, because the Knute Rockne coaching tree permeates all throughout all of college football. I think his tree is the greatest of all time because Bear Bryant came out of the Knute Rockne coaching tree. So many, Dabo Swinney can be traced back to the Clemson head coach today, who won the national championship last year, can be traced to the Knute Rockne coaching tree because, he played for Gene Stallings at Alabama. Gene Stallings played for Bear Bryant. Bear Bryant played for Frank Thomas, and Frank Thomas played for Rockne. You could trace it. There you go. There's a lineage right there. And a lot of coaches from today can trace their lineage back to Rockne because so many of his players became head coaches in their own right. Vince Lombardi played for Jim Crowley, who was one of the Four Horsemen for Rockne. So even Vince Lombardi is like a product of the Knute Rockne coaching tree. That's how far his influence permeates throughout all of America, American college football there. So Rockne is one of them.
Excellent.
Another one. Yeah. I'm trying to think of another one. I mean, I was impressed with Tom Osborne, the former head coach in Nebraska. Talking to him, he was one of my first interviews, and the strength of the man, incredible strength, and not really charismatic. He's like anti-charisma, as it were, but just the strength in his character. And what amazed me was how high up he rated. I knew he was going to be one of the 50, but I didn't realize he was that great. I mean, in my book, I got him ranked at number 4. But if I had come out with this book exactly a year ago, he would have been ranked number 2, because what happened is last season, the 2018 season, Nick Saban and Urban Meyer leapfrogged over him and pushed him back to 4th place. But Tom Osborne was one of the most underrated coaches in all of college football history. And hopefully my chapter on him kind of rectifies that situation and gives him that recognition and acclaim that he truly and richly deserves, in my view. I would love to meet him in the flesh, Tom Osborne. Incredible man.
Fantastic. And Matt, in the few minutes we have left, I mean, we definitely are going to have links to all 3 of your books back out on our show notes. And we're coming up to the holiday season, and I'm sure maybe it's a little heavy for a stocking, but it could certainly be a gift somewhere in the home during the holiday season. If our listeners would like to learn more about you and your work and your writing, where's the best place for them to go?
I have a Facebook page dedicated to my writing career. I also, on Amazon, all 3 of my books are available on Amazon. I have a personal page on Amazon. Just type in my name and you'll see all 3 of my books. If you're interested in my podcast, like my Package Tours podcast, all you have to do is type in my name on YouTube and they can come up. Also, every Thursday night at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, I am on the Frathouse podcasting show, which is broadcast on Blog Talk Radio online, and that's every Thursday night. You can find me there. I don't really have a personal author website. I should do it, but I haven't gotten around to doing it. I'm also on LinkedIn. If you want to link up with me there on LinkedIn, you can. Also, I'm on Facebook if you want to link in with me there. I'm part of several sports history groups dealing with hockey history, college football history. In fact, I created my own Facebook college history page. It's called the College Literature and History Appreciation page on Facebook there. We've got over 70 members and we're growing every day. You can join us there if you love college football history. I'm on the Pro Football History page there. I'm always putting things up there. So if you want to link up with me, that's where you can reach me, okay?
That's perfect. And we'll get those links up on our show notes as well. Before we sign off, Matt, is there a, if you had to give your, advice, or you wanted to tell your 13-year-old self who is reading and writing, looking back, what would you tell him?
Be bold, be daring. The only way to articulate your thoughts is to put it down on paper. The more you write, the better you get at it. Just keep working at it. Not writing is to die and stagnate. If you really want to grow, you've got to do, okay? Don't sit there and wring your hands. Do something, create something. I mean, when I was sad, instead of wallowing in my pitting pile or committing vandalism or crimes or doing drugs or drinking or anything like that, I wrote a song. I wrote lyrics. It was sad stuff. It was very sad and depressed stuff, but it was a way of converting sadness and pain into positive energy, into positive, creative, artistic expression. And it saved my life. Literally, it did save my life. I mean, if it weren't for my writing, either I would have died a long time ago, or else I might have gone to jail, or else who knows, maybe I would have killed myself or something like that, because I had a rough life. I went through a lot of pain, as a kid in school and all that. The school system I went to was a very bad place, and I suffered a lot. But I converted that pain into art, and now I have a writing career, and I've got a lot more books that I'm working on. In fact, my next book, which will be released 3 years from now, will deal with the 50 greatest NFL head coaches of all time, and I've got a lot more to go. Major League Baseball, pro basketball, college basketball. I'm even working on ideas about golf too, if possible, if I live long enough.
That's fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah, but just do something. Don't just pout or sulk. Get off your duff and do something. Travel. Take a journey. Experience life. I love traveling. I mean, don't have a theoretical notion of your country. Go out and see your country. Talk to people. Shake hands with people. Eat the foods. Walk the trails. Hike the mountains. See the sights and all that. get to know your country and also know the world too, because I've been abroad as well. Travel, read, not just books on things on the internet, but crack open a book and relax and read, because there's no substitute for reading a good book as opposed to reading something on the internet. It's just, I believe in books, just be active, not just physically active. You don't have to be an athlete, but just intellectually active. Keep your mind going, exercise your brain, do something, be something, see your future, be your future. Like that movie Caddyshack, which actually made a lot of sense. It makes a heck of a lot of sense. Just do it, make it real, do something about it. Even if you fall short, you learn from your failures and you just keep trying and keep attacking the problem.
You got to step into the arena and get dirty and bloody and dusty. And because unless you do that, you never know what's possible. Matt, I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day and spending it here on Success Insight Podcast. We're definitely looking forward to hearing more about your work and your books. And I'm so grateful that you were able to come on and discuss it.
Thank you. I also want to thank you too, Howard. Thank you, and God bless you.
There you have it, folks. We have been chatting with Matt DiBiase, lifelong sports historian, author of some phenomenal books, NHL's Coaching Elite, which is the bench bosses, the NHL's Coaching Elite, The Art of the Dealers, the NHL's Greatest General Managers, and his latest work of art, Lords of the Gridiron, college football's greatest coaches. And Matt was gracious enough to gift us with a short reading from the book about the legendary Darrell Royal. Folks, go out, check out Matt's work. We're going to provide links back on his Amazon author page, as well as to his Facebook and LinkedIn sites. And we'll give you links back to his blogs as well. So this was information-packed, interest-packed. If you didn't get something out of this interview, you need to listen to it a second time. So folks, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, go out there, have a phenomenal day, and we'll see you on the next episode of the Success Insight Podcast. Take care now.
Success Insight is a production of Fox Coaching and First Story Strategies. Find us online, successinsightpodcast.com.